Welcome back, everyone. It's time for our next talk this afternoon in the Symposium, and we have Associate Professor Adam Sparks from the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development in WA. Now, Adam's going to be talking about his project, which is another new one in the Food Agility suite of projects called WA Data Sharing. And so this project will basically create a whole farm management simulation tool that will enable farmers to model investment and management decisions across their farm. Now, Adam's team estimates that with a 10% adoption, this is worth about $20 million to the growers in WA on an annual basis. Additionally, this project will create a culture of data sharing between farmers and service providers. So Adam, the floor is yours if you'd like to share your screen. Go for it. And I can see your screen there.
Good deal. All right. Thanks, Mick. What in the world are we doing here? Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, so this is a new project, as Mick just indicated. We just started in July. So I don't have a lot of insights about any of the research we've done yet. Honestly, I haven't even started modeling any of the data yet, but what we have been doing is trying to figure out how to get the data sharing right. And so since that's actually at the heart of the project, I figured it was a good topic for a 20-minute talk today. So we have some really good insights into the data sharing and why this project's important to the agriculture industry. I'm going to start off with well, it's a blog post on LinkedIn from Belinda Lay, who is a very innovative farmer in Esperance here in WA. Farmers know that their data has value and they're always looking for ways to get more utility from it. And Belinda is a farmer here and co-founder of the Esperance Zone Innovation Group, or EZI. And she has a blog post called Utility versus Control Curve, which was based on a conversation with Wes Lawrence from Axis Tech, which is an ag service data provider as well. And what their discussion was, that utility from data doesn't always mean that there's access to the data or that farmers have control of the data. And companies are also aware that data has value, and they often do what they can to keep control of it for themselves because they want to derive that value from it as well. Sometimes farmers are able to get full control of the data, or maybe they've generated it themselves. However, if it's something that's been generated in another platform, then you lose these tight integrations and the easy to gain insights that you get from having the data in a proprietary platform. And so while you may have the data yourself and you have complete control over it and complete ownership, you don't have the know-how to visualize and derive utility from it anymore. And so you may turn to a third party for a custom application. And that's where the importance of the data ownership and control comes in, because we often relinquish control of our data for convenience and utility. It's often easy to leave the data in a proprietary platform and just look at graphs and figures, using the supplied tools. And an example that a lot of us might relate to is if you think about your Facebook timeline, if you have one, and when you get up in the morning and you look at your Facebook, over on the left side, or maybe in your timeline, there's memories. And if you look at that, Facebook does this nice job of collating in a really easy to digest way of, 3 years ago on this day, 5 years ago on this day, for however long you've been a member of Facebook, they'll remind you of your posts, of your photos, etc. Now, if you think about the memories that it presents you with every day, if you had all of that data yourself, because if you think about this, Facebook is that third party that owns everything and tightly integrates it. If you had that data yourself, could you turn something that looks roughly like a spreadsheet and some images in a folder over here into something that's an easy to browse web page that presents you with your memories on your phone every morning when you wake up? That's the sort of thing that farmers are facing here with, we've got utility from the data, but we don't have control over the data because we know how tightly Facebook controls our data, right? So a lot of us are comfortable doing this with our personal data in our lives, but for farmers, it becomes much more important because it involves a lot of financial information and other sensitive details that they're often very keenly aware of, and they don't want to be shared or released. In Belinda's case, in her blog post, she relates that she shared her data with a third party to derive utility from it because the third party had expertise that she wanted to draw from to derive utility from the data, only to find out that the third party nearly shared the data without her permission. And so this really highlighted for her and illustrates for others the importance of data ownership and control and the ability to derive utility from it, which is really what this whole project is about, is illustrating the complexities around data sharing and showing farmers that, yes, you can safely share data and derive utility from it. So our current state of ag data sharing is a little bit like this. We know farmers want to derive use from their data. We know that they want to retain ownership and control of their data, and they should. And we also know we can transfer files around the world at the blink of an eye. The internet facilitates this in a fantastic way. It makes data sharing really easy. But if we look at the current state of data sharing, we see currently we're in a bit of a morass. We've got the old switchboard here. All the connections exist or can be made, but sometimes it takes someone manually operating the switchboard to connect point A to point B. And sometimes you don't want, whoever's doing that to be able to listen in like they used to at the switchboards. The people that operated the switchboards sometimes were notoriously the town gossip because they knew everything going on. And when you're sharing data, that may oftentimes be the last thing that you want. So while this DPIRD e-broker is not a part of the project per se on data sharing, it is a very important piece of what DPIRD is doing. So this is a separate project, but related. So I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about it and how it relates to this WA farm data sharing project. DPIRD saw this market failure and started establishing the e-broker because we see benefits of a unified data exchange platform. And so we want to be able to provide secure and reliable data exchange. We think it needs to be government managed with no commercial involvement. It should have standardized data exchange formats, which simplifies things for people that are, or organizations that are sharing the data. And we want to be able to take advantage of new Internet of Things technology. And so we think that, by doing this, this frees up farmers' data and creates a larger market for data collectors and data service providers. So I'm going to touch on those terms in a bit, but basically data collectors kind of collect data from farmers or data originators, and then data service providers are where DPIRD is sitting in this WA farm data sharing project, where we're providing a service for the data for the data originator or the farmer to derive utility from it. And if we want to take a step back and go, but why should government be involved in this? Because the second point here, with no commercial involvement, is the idea that we need to address the failure in the market through an intervention to build a system that creates a larger, more equitable market. And our role in this project is to show that, by building this system, this project is able to then show the benefits of using a system like this to farmers. So while you may build this wonderful data sharing system, if you don't have the incentive to actually use the data sharing project, like what I'm going to cover here about the WA farm data sharing project, then there's no real reason to share your data. The government's role while addressing this risk is enabling an opportunity to create this large market, and industry shouldn't or wouldn't be as effective in creating this market as commercial organizations will inevitably be compromised by vested interest. Again, I go back to, they want to control the data because they see monetary value from it, whereas we feel that we want to empower farmers to derive that monetary value and utility from their data. So this WA farm data sharing project, while it's about sharing data, we're going to encourage farmers to realize the benefits of sharing their data by tackling liming. But we're envisioning that it's not going to be quite this labor intensive. It actually looks a bit more like this nowadays. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to use data that farmers share with us under legal agreements to provide them with benefit or utility as a data service provider, and building a whole farm model that initially provides liming strategies to farmers. Our idea is to start off with whole farm liming, but eventually this would be a scalable model that we would be able to ingest data that was shared and give feedback or suggestions on strategies for further investments in equipment or further investments in, should I buy that farm next door or do I hire someone new? And so these sorts of things, the big ideas that we want to look at that can only be realized by actually having a good set of data from the farm that's shared with us. And instead of doing a regional sort of approach, which is typically done for whole farm models, we want to actually be able to say, this real data from this farm was shared with us, and we give you a turnkey suggestion back for your farm. So we put together a document that details which data we need for this current project, the liming, to provide to the data originator, the farmers, to provide to me as a data service provider. And these data include information on the farm's paddocks, as how they're managed, soil types, historical weather for the farm, the yields, the crops that were grown, the sequences, liming and other soil amelioration that's been undertaken, fertilization history, et cetera. And this document goes out with a data sharing agreement letter. So when I talk about these ideas of data originators and whatnot, a data originator is a farmer or a grower group, cooperative or industrial professional that acts on behalf of a collective of farmers, or like EZI, the Esperance Zone Innovation Group. Data collector, this is where somebody like Wes Lawrence comes in, who's an ag service data provider. They collect or create data either by technical means, so it's either ag machinery, electronic processing programs, or by themselves, or has been commissioned, who has commissioned data providers for this purpose. The data collector has a responsibility to ensure the data is transformed accurately, reliably, is stored securely, and has the responsibility for making the data available in the exchange. The data service provider, which is the hat that I'm wearing in the project, is an organization that under the agreement delivers a data service using raw data from data originators or farmers or a group of farmers, and then provide data service back to them. So we give them new and transformed data that they can use to in decision making. And in this case, often DPIRD wears multiple hats. We're building eBroker, but we will be working as the data service provider here. So to quickly go through what the project is going to look like, we're going to ingest the existing data. So we've got farm management platform software like AgWorld or MyFarmSmart. So these could be thought of as data service collectors, or somebody like Wes Lawrence and Access Tech that has access to these sites as well can ingest the data along with accounting software data that gives your income, cost management practices of capital, et cetera. Wes also likely has things like automatic systems or Internet of Things. So header maps come in, weather station data, level sensors, prescription maps, these sorts of things, and historical data from weather stations nearby that we use to run a model using past weather as future climate. So we take the last 3 to 5 years and then we predict out about 20 years into the future using that. The data comes in, it becomes transformed to new data. So we transfer it through an API that DPIRD develops, which that API in the future will be the eBroker, which I've talked about. And that's listed here as eConnect Information Gateway, which allows farmers to have complete control over the flow of the information. They can flick a switch and say, no, we don't want to share that data with you anymore. If they decide that I've done something that they don't like with the data and I no longer have access to it. Hopefully that doesn't happen. It comes in, it goes into secure storage in a database, which then I use for modeling to predict yield and crop value based on that land use data, the Internet of Things, and the accounting information that they've shared with us. Finally, we're going to develop an API to securely share the data, the information back. So we'll just generate some custom reports that go back through either a web page or AgWorld or MyFarmSmart. So these are types of things that farmers and agronomists use on their phone to make decisions and keep records and keep track of things, what's going on. And the farmers use these reports then to make decisions on the best strategy for applying Lyme. And the data that we DPIRD receive is deleted from the database. So this is what an example report looks like. So we're proposing to develop that we give back to the farmers in their smartphone or whatever. And so it's important to bear in mind, this report is custom tailored to the data originator's individual farm, down to the weather experience, the cropping systems, the farm finances, individual paddocks, soils, and histories. And so we have two strategies shown here, which are comparisons with not putting Lyme on at all. So strategy 1 on top is a strategic application, only paddocks below a target pH on a 5-year cycle, and strategy 2 is more aggressive, where you remediate everything and then top up at 5-year cycles. The left-hand column is the net present value of future return, or the value discounted over 20 years into the future. Or in other words, how likely are you to make money by following strategy 1 on top or 2 on the bottom versus not applying Lyme at all. And on the right is your risk, or what's the lowest point that the cash flow reaches. And we could see, if you look at this, strategy 1 is more profitable than responsive to cash flow, but the peak debt is not as low as strategy 2. If we actually zoom in and look at strategy 1, what's likely to happen compared to doing nothing is there's a range of possibilities. And the most likely is where the graph is the highest. And it ranges from losing $50 per hectare in yellow on the far left of the left-hand graph to that really thin tail on the right, making $300 per hectare in purple. And the risk graph on the right shows how big your debt is likely to become before it starts improving. So the most likely value is around $53 per hectare, but it ranges from losing $100 per hectare to a positive value of $25 per hectare. And so this report's a result of a whole farm Monte Carlo stochastic simulation model. I haven't even been able to get into this yet because we just started in July and we're still working on getting the data sharing coming through. But each of these graphs summarize different outcomes and allow growers to make decisions on what's best for their situation. So DPIRD's legal and IP team drafted a data sharing agreement specifically for the project while we wait for eBroker to get sorted. I modified what they gave me slightly and sent it to 3 farmers that had agreed initially to be part of the project. We gathered feedback from these farmers and representatives of the EZI grower group as a whole on what our data requirements were and what the terms for sharing these data were with us. And when we circulated everything, everybody was pretty supportive. One was super supportive, said, yeah, it's a go, let's do it. One said, well, it's pretty good, I'm pretty okay with it. And one said, hang on, I've got a couple hesitations. And then there's some other folks in the group that have some even bigger hangups and wanted some clarifications. But overall, they were really supportive. And so we worked with them going back and forth on the document until we came to an agreement. And I'm happy to say actually this morning that these 3 individuals have agreed to sign off on the data sharing agreement as we've modified it with their feedback. So, one of the biggest important things of feedback we got from some of the farmers was they didn't feel comfortable sharing geospatial information because it would allow me to identify exactly where their farm was. So we can get around that. Initially, I'd said, well, we have to have this. And they said, well, hang on, we don't want to share that. And I said, well, if you don't want to share it, then we can go down a different path. And we have 2 sets of data that you can share with us. And one has geospatial information, which puts the onus on me to collect much more of the information on the paddock soils and the weather data, et cetera. And I do identifying the paddocks. But if they don't want to share geospatial information, they need to share paddock information with us that links paddock identifiers with the cropping histories, the fertilization practices, all the soil profiles, and give us the last 3 to 5 years of weather data for a representative weather station. And they can de-identify where their farm is in that way. And they were happy with that. So I think that was a win-win that we were able to come to an agreement here. There's going to be growers that are going to go from we're never going to share data with you to growers that are just happy to give you whatever you ask for. And we know that the growers on the far side of this bell-shaped curve aren't in our population, but we felt it was important to get as many over to the left side of that curve to come along as we could. And by working with them closely and meeting with them in person, I went to Esperance and talked to a couple of them and discussed their concerns. You know, we were able to make changes to the agreement and get their full support for the project. And so I want to wrap up with a couple excerpts of conversations we've had with farmers on this topic of data sharing and liming. And Joel Andrew, who's going to be part of the project with us, said, you know, there's a lot of people that don't put value on data, and I think we can change that because there's a lot of value to it, how we manage the farm, for business better. And then he went on to say, you know, we're collecting data now with the expectation that we don't know what we'll be using it for in 5 years' time. And lastly, one that really highlighted why this particular project is important. As a consultant, you'd hand over a liming report and they'd say, I don't know, I can't spread this much lime. And they couldn't afford to do that across the whole farm. And he said, so, you know, they'd spread 1 ton across everything and get a negative return, while he thinks they would have been better with a smaller target area and a higher application rate. And he summed that up by saying, I think we've done as much damage with liming advice by not giving them that next step, which is what this project is aiming to do. We'll give them those strategies and say, pick your strategy. Here's a couple different approaches. What works best for you? And for the last bit, you know, as it's useful in sharing the value, we need to do this. John Sanderson, who is very engaged in the Esperance Zone Innovation Group, said that as farmers, we focus heavily on our produce, how to get the best yield, the best quality, and the best returns from our products. A product that gets forgotten about is data. Already our industry is producing huge amounts of data each day, and in the coming years, this increasing yield of data is set to swamp us. That's why I took part in the creation of EZI. It's my belief that we need to start investing time and money into data, just as we do with other commodities we produce. Clean and organized data sets are the future of agriculture, and without them, we can never hope to maximize productivity and profitability. Thanks.
Thanks, Adam. Really great presentation on, you know, what the importance of data is to farmers and, you know, how it can be used to create some really valuable insights. So I guess from my perspective, I've got a question about the data sharing agreement that you've actually created there from DPIRD. Obviously, data sharing agreements can be very complex beasts of things that can have many different facets, but the one you've sort of done collaboratively with the farmers, is it a complex document or is it much more simpler?
We went into this knowing that farmers are time poor and they don't want to spend a lot of time reading a lot of legalese. And so we went to our IP and legal team and said, we need something that's like a maximum of 2 pages. So the letter itself is 2 pages, and the data sharing agreement that's part of that letter then is 2 pages. So it's a whole 4-page document. And they were happy with that. It's easy to digest. They, you know, and went back and forth. And it wasn't even the length of it. It was just a couple terms that they wanted clarified about the terms, you know, the term as in how long the term was that I could use the data. Could they come back and say, well, I don't want you using the data anymore, and those sorts of things. And so we clarified those things with them, and they, you know, having a short document made it pretty easy to go back and forth with them because farmers are busy, and especially right now they're getting ready to go out and harvest here in WA anyway. So it's pretty good that we managed to get them to actually sit down and give us feedback.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, there's a suggestion here in one of the questions, which you can probably see anyway, but it's a suggestion around, you know, whether to go through a paper agreement type process or to have something directly implemented in the data processing code for that data sharing, you know, and legal agreement in an API type situation that it's directly and quickly negotiated. Is there any scope to morph to that sort of
okay, so yeah, and I touched on that briefly, and I didn't really even dig into that much, but this data sharing agreement we've gone back and forth with them on is a bit of a stopgap. Once eBroker or whatever DPIRD calls it is in place, there will be legal agreements that everybody agrees to within that. But a lot of that isn't yet set up, so we had to get something in place. But this was instructive to us as an organization in understanding what's important to farmers. So I'm going to be handing this stuff over to my colleague here at DPIRD and saying, these are the things that are topmost in farmers' minds, when you start doing these things. So ultimately, it's going to be, like when you download an app on your phone and you click, yes, I agree to this, you're going to go to the website, the eBroker website, you'll sign in, you'll join up, and you'll click, yes, I agree to this, and provide your contact details and an ABN number and some of these things. And the legally binding agreements will all take place that way. There won't be circulating documents back and forth. But for us, I think, I guess, I don't know if it's the eureka moment, but it was just that nice moment of, being able to reach that understanding with farmers and say, yes, we're willing to share this stuff with you. We trust you enough to do that, but, you need to address this, and this for us. And just us being willing to address those things with them and go meet with them and talk with them in person really helped build those bridges.
Yes, absolutely. And would you say that was your eureka moment for this particular project so far, at least?
So far, I'd say, yeah, that was pretty good. Just, to sit down and that photo of me sitting with Joel with the dog under the desk, when he was saying, I think we did more harm than good. And, we need to be sharing data and deriving more information from it. Every farmer that I spoke with so far has said that we need to be deriving more utility from it. We see the value in this, and we're happy you're doing this. So,
yeah, and I guess that's a theme that we've seen with a lot of the projects. Most of the farmers and producers do see the value in the data, and they just want to capture that data. And projects like this will allow that to happen. We've just got another question coming now. It said, what do the commercial companies think about eBroker? Obviously, eBroker may not be released just yet, but are you working with any commercial companies around eBroker?
So eBroker is actually a separate project from this one that this one will use eventually. eBroker is going to be open to anyone to use. So a company can go sign up and either act as a data collector to make data available for primary producers, or they could act as a data service provider, and they just have to agree to the terms. We are working with a couple companies. I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, Wes Lawrence from Access Tech, and I only had 20 minutes, so I didn't really go into great detail, but Wes is a super cool bloke, does a lot of great work, and he's really keen to have something like this where he's able to connect the data producers with data service providers, sorts of things. So from that side of thing, he's happy to do it. For this data sharing project that I'm leading, we're working with Ag World in particular as well to try to get some linkage between their apps and this. So there are certainly connections that are happening, that are going on, and they will have input into it.
Yep, fantastic. And I guess finally, Adam, before we finish up, have you got any sort of gnarly things on the horizon or gnarly issues that you can foresee happening within this project?
Well, there's lots of different types of data involved, and as someone who is, I guess, if you wanted to classify me in one way, you could classify me as a bit of a data scientist. The most gnarly thing I think is probably going to be trying to wrangle all the data that I'm going to get into something that I can actually use and run my model over.
Yes, absolutely. And particularly, I suppose, once you start looking at your proof of concept, moving out past lime and going to the next commodity, whatever that's going to be. Once we start
looking at different things, it's going to really challenge my thinking about how I've built the structure of the model and put things together and expanding it. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly be a challenge going forward, but looking forward to its potential. It could be a game changer over there. So yeah, look, Adam, on behalf of everyone here, thank you for your presentation today. It's been great to have you as part of the symposium, and yeah, we look forward to watching this project develop over the next year.
All right. Thanks, Mick.
Thanks, Adam. Cheers.